네, 그럼 지금부터 한국의 SDG4 이행과
Ladies
교육
and
회복 국제
gentlemen,
포럼
we will now
세션
begin
A를
session
시작해
A
보도록
of
하겠습니다.
the 2021
세션
International
A는
Education
포용성,
Forum, Korea's
형평성, 질
SDG4
제고를 위한
implementation
미래
and
교육 혁신,
educational
한국을
recovery.
넘어서
The theme
세계로를
of this
주제로 진행이
session
되겠습니다.
is
역시
innovation for
실시간으로
inclusive
발표하시는
and
연사분들께
equitable
질문을
quality
남겨주실 수가
education.
있습니다.
You can
댓글창
leave
상단에 있는
questions
링크를
for the
참고하셔서
presenters.
질문이나
Please take
응원
advantage
메시지를
of the link on
남겨주시면
the top of the
감사하겠습니다.
YouTube
세션
comment
A는 한유경 이화여자대학교
section.
대학
The
원장님께서 진행을
moderator
해주실
of this
텐데요.
session is
한유경
Dean of the
교수님은
Graduate School of
한국교육학회
Ewha
부회장을
Women's
역임하고
University.
계시고요. 교육 국제화 역량 인증
She is
평가
the Vice
위원장으로도
President of
활동을
the
하신 바가
Society of Korean
있습니다. 네,
Education.
한유경 교수님
I would now like to turn the
부탁드리겠습니다.
podium over to Professor Han Yu-Kyung. Please turn on the mic for interpretation.
2015년 SDG4 채택 이후 그리고
Since the adoption of SDG4 in 2015 and along with COVID-19, we want to take stock of the implementation status and discuss ways forward. I am a professor of the Education Department at Ewha Women's University. So I'm very interested in this topic, and I think the topic has many implications for us. I will now invite the first presenter of this session. The first presenter is Secretary General of the Korean National Commission for UNESCO, Han Kyung-gu. And Mr. Han served as president of the Society of Korean Studies. He has also served as the former dean at College of Liberal Studies at Seoul National University. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Han Kyung-gu, Secretary General of the Korean National Commission for UNESCO. Since 2015, the Korean National Commission for UNESCO has been making efforts for the domestic implementation of SDG4 and international cooperation. It also serves as the Secretariat of the National SDG4 Consultative Group since 2017. Today, I'm delighted to have this opportunity to suggest the direction for Korean education in the post-COVID era in implementing the Sustainable Development Goals. At the UN General Assembly in September 2015, the international community set 17 goals to be achieved by 2030 for sustainable development. In particular, the fourth goal, SDG4, is a goal in the education sector to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. SDG4 was established as a compilation of many years of discussions in the global education community, and in particular is based on the results of discussions at the 2015 World Education Forum held in Incheon, South Korea. SDG4 consists of 7 targets and 3 means of implementation. Each of these targets not only emphasizes equitable educational opportunities from early childhood education to higher education, but also calls for quality education throughout the life cycle. It is a major goal of SDG4 to ensure that everyone can not only read, write, and handle basic calculations, but also acquire the knowledge and skills necessary for sustainable development. Korea, in fulfilling its responsibility as the host country of the World Education Forum in 2015, has made efforts to implement SDG4 at home and abroad. From 2016 to 2021, as a member of the SDG Education 2030 Steering Committee, it has made efforts to promote the implementation of SDG4 in the international community. Meanwhile, at home, the SDG4 Education Consultative Group promotes and monitors implementation of SDG4 targets. Also, annual forums and other activities have been held to facilitate implementation. In addition, in order to implement the SDGs in accordance with the Korean situation, the the K SDGs were established in 2018, and their implementation is being monitored. In particular, this year, Korea took part in setting national benchmarks for the implementation of SDG 4, which was led by UNESCO. Korea set benchmark values for 2025 and 2030 regarding key indicators in the education sector. This was especially significant in that specific benchmark values were set based on consultations among relevant government departments and experts. It is also an expression of the country's commitment to facilitating the implementation of SDG 4. In line with the Leave No One Behind spirit of the Sustainable Development Goals, the Korean government has continued efforts to expand the publicness of education in all areas, from early childhood education to adult learning. As one of the most key examples, in order to expand state responsibility for early childhood education, since 2018, the government provides subsidies for tuition and childcare for children aged between 3 and 5 from the government budget. Furthermore, the government has proactively expanded the number of classes in public kindergartens and daycare centers, and also increased quotas to enlarge admission opportunities at these public institutions. Since the first semester of 2021, high school education is free in Korea. High school education is free for all students after 2 years of gradual exemption of high school tuition. In a sense, it could be seen as a completion of efforts towards free education in all levels, from primary to high school, since middle school education became free 17 years ago. In addition, in order to ensure equal opportunities for higher education for all citizens, we are trying to alleviate the economic burden of completing higher education by increasing state-funded scholarships for university students and lowering student loan interest rates. Meanwhile, to expand lifelong learning opportunities for all citizens, in 2015, K massive open online courses were launched, providing high-quality educational content developed in cooperation with universities, companies, and research institutes. Korea has presented global citizenship education as an important topic in the global education community. The aim of global citizenship education, as outlined in SDG 4.7, is to learn and practice the responsibilities and duties of a responsible global citizen. To that end, Korea is conducting a variety of activities in cooperation with not only UNESCO-affiliated organizations, but also local provincial education offices and local governments. In addition, Korea gained attention by operating the GCED, Group of Friends for Solidarity and Inclusion with Global Citizenship Education at the UN and UNESCO, amid spreading racism and hate caused by COVID-19. 한편 코로나19로 인해서 전 세계적으로 유례 없는 등교 불가 사태가 발생했습니다.
The Republic of Korea's Ministry of Education has made consistent and concerted efforts to ensure that quality education opportunities have not been interrupted. First of all, during the initial spread of COVID-19, the government put in place legislation and guidelines to embed distance learning systems within the existing education system and minimize potential confusion in schools. At the same time, attention was given to ensuring the quality of education. 2 public learning management systems accommodating 3 million simultaneous users were constructed within just 1 week to enable a stable digital learning environment. Various integrated platforms were also constructed so that educational content and know-how on distance learning could be freely developed and shared among teachers. In addition, in August 2020, the government launched a plan for strengthening the educational safety net for all to ensure inclusive education opportunities for marginalized students, including students from low-income households, students with disabilities, and students from multicultural backgrounds. Measures included the provision of digital devices and translation of educational content. Since 2021, the government has also directed its efforts towards enabling students to resume their everyday lives in a safe manner. Special attention has been given to students requiring psychological and emotional support due to the impact of the lengthy and engaging pandemic situation, while other measures to support the students' educational recovery include deployment of 2 teachers for 1 class and provision of customized supplementary learning. In October, the Ministry of Education established a plan for gradual return to normalcy in education. Safe school opening was one of the priority actions agreed by the global community in the 2020 Global Education Meetings, and in the context of the Republic of Korea has been pursuing safe school openings based on scientific data and thorough measures to prevent the further spread of COVID-19. A global society has been discussing how jointly to address the education crisis since UNESCO's COVID-19 education virtual ministerial meeting in March 2020, and the Republic of Korea has been an active party in exchanging information and experience with the global community. It has been internationally recognized that Korea's response to the pandemic has been based on principles such as openness, transparency, and democracy, and these principles have been applied equally to its response to the COVID-19 education crisis. Korea has shared information transparently about its domestic situation through participation in a variety of international meetings and joined the global efforts to tackle the education crisis. The COVID-19 situation still persists, but the efforts of the past 2 years have raised several new fundamental questions. School closures have affected more than 90% of students worldwide. Although the situation has been improved by online classes as well as partial and full school reopenings, we still do not know the medium and long-term impact of the learning losses on students worldwide. Educational losses caused by the COVID-19 situation may not just concern knowledge. It has been very hard to sustain the holistic social and emotional experience of education during the pandemic. Precious moments such as learning together at school, eating together, playing together, and making peace after arguing. The experience of distance learning has raised the fundamental question of what it is that students should learn together at schools. A variety of forms of support have been provided to prevent learners' economic backgrounds from resulting in access gaps in the context of distance learning. However, learning gaps based on socioeconomic differences have not been resolved completely. The world has seen educational inequality worsen significantly during the pandemic. 2년여간 이어진 코로나19라는 터널의 끝이 아직은 보이지 않습니다.
It has been 2 years since the outbreak, and yet the end is not in sight. There were times when it seemed we could see the light at the end of the tunnel. However, the fact remains that it is difficult to see what we can expect post-COVID. Despite this uncertainty, the impact of non-face-to-face classes experienced by the global education community is leading naturally to a discourse on the future of education. I would like to propose 4 challenges we must undertake in the post-COVID era. First is to strengthen the publicness of education. We must strengthen inclusivity for the ordinary learners who account for the majority, as well as those learners who are socially marginalized. In November 2021, UNESCO's Future of Education report was launched, and that report highlights education as a common good. Education must be provided to all, just like water or air. Education must be provided to all as a basic human right. Furthermore, members of society must come together to set educational goals, ensuring prosperity for individuals and communities alike through education. However, this is not reality. A research conducted by the UNESCO's Bangkok office in 2018 found in Korea and many other countries in the Asia-Pacific region a highly competitive and test-focused culture. Competition to obtain high scores and high-stakes examinations trigger inequalities in education that reflects the socio-economic status of learners. The pandemic has only exacerbated existing inequalities in education. Attention must be given to education not only as a tool for competition or a ladder of status mobility, but as a foundation for all to prosper together. The second challenge is to enhance the connection between education and the world. In other words, education must also seek to develop in a sustainable manner. Sustainable development here refers to balanced and harmonious development of the economy, society, and environment. In UNESCO's Future of the Education report, climate change, social inequality are cited as the challenge of our times. The power of education is crucial in overcoming these challenges. Education has the power to bring change, to enable humans to become a part of nature, to live with nature as a community of common destiny, to live amongst others. This power is needed desperately at this juncture. The report also underlines unlearning, that is, to not learn discrimination and prejudice in the first place. Members of society, in order to take a step forward towards sustainability, must engage in active discussion and form a consensus. In this sense, it is welcome news that in Korea, with regards to the ongoing general discussions on curriculum revision in Korea, ecological transformation and global citizenry for all will be reflected. This can be seen as a reflection of the special will to strengthen competencies related to sustainable development as a capability to respond to future changes. And I sincerely hope that Korea's education continues in this direction. Third, we must promote lifelong education. Currently, most of the discourse on the future of education is limited to school education. This makes this challenge an even more important task. People
학습해야
in this day and
하는
age, can no longer independently understand and navigate the world with what they have learned in schools.
과거의 학교에서 배운
What we have
것만을
learned
가지고
is
이
constantly
시대를 주체적으로
updated
이해하고
and
살아가야 되는
renewed.
관계가 있습니다. 학교 교육에 대한 논의에서 확장되는 미래
Our
교육
discourse
논의가 필요하며
must
궁극적으로는
broaden
우리 사회가
to pursue
사회로 나아갈 수 있도록
a
교육
learning
발전을
society. We need to
학교뿐만 아니라
broaden
가정,
our discourse on
직장,
future education.
지역사회
Schools,
등등
homes,
모두
workplaces, local
적극적인
communities
학습의 자원이
must
되어야
all become
50여
active
년 전
places
유네스코
of learning.
국제교육발전위원회가
And I hope that we can realize a learning
학습
society envisioned by the UNESCO Global Education Development Committee 50 years ago.
교육 분야
Finally,
국제 협력의 강화를
We must strengthen international cooperation in the field of education. The Korean government has been promoting continuous international cooperation to achieve SDG 4. We invite outstanding students from developing countries to Korea, and through the Leading University Project for International Cooperation, we support the establishment of departments and improvement of curriculums in universities in developing countries. Also, through UNESCO's Trust Fund BEAR project, since 2011, we have been supporting vocational technical education and training in African countries. The Korean National Commission for UNESCO, in cooperation with the National Commission for UNESCO's in developing countries, is carrying out a bridge project to support non-formal education. I hope that these international projects will continue to be promoted and strengthened for many years to come. I also hope that we can contribute to the achievement of SDG 4 in the international community by actively sharing Korea's best practices as well as its trials and errors. In addition, it is expected that the international community, countries, and regions will be able to systematically join forces for the implementation of SDG 4 by increasing the connection to the education agenda. The Korean National Commission for UNESCO will continue its efforts to implement SDG 4, and we will continue to contribute in developing the future of education. I hope that this forum will be remembered as one of many efforts to contribute to the implementation of SDG 4. Thank you for your attention.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much, Secretary General Han Kyung-gu. You just made such a comprehensive and extensive presentation, particularly the implementation status of SDG 4 and the achievement of Korea in terms of the implementation of the goal, covering the infant-related education to adult education. So we are getting closer to the end of COVID-19, hopefully. But once we are over with the COVID-19, there are tasks ahead of us. And actually, your presentation gave us the insight about what we can do after the COVID-19 pandemic situation is over. Our next speaker is Professor Kim Min-hee from Daegu University. Professor Kim Min-hee is a member of College Evaluation Committee in Korea University Accreditation Institute. Professor Kim Min-hee will deliver a presentation on the theme of domestic SDG 4 implementation cases in the midst of the COVID-19 crisis and suggestions for education in Korea. Professor Kim Min-hee, could you please go ahead with your presentation? Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Kim Min-hee. It's a great pleasure for me to address before you in this great event of the 2021 International Education Forum, the Korea's SDG 4 implementation and educational recovery. Today, I'd like to talk about the cases of SDG 4 implementation here in Korea at the city level, the provincial government level, and the central government level. My presentation is composed of 4 parts. Since the SDG goals are briefed by the Secretary General Han Kyung-gu, I will skip the first part of my presentation. These this slide is the relationship between SDG 4 and the Korean education system. And the second part of my presentation is about the responses of the Korean education sector to the COVID-19 pandemic. We all know that the COVID-19 prohibited students from going to school for their classes. So the online education was introduced, and a lot of the teachers and the students participated in online education, and the various contents have been developed and uploaded on this online platform. So there was no or very little interruption in terms of education on the online platforms. The online classes were made available in the broadcasting system site as well as a dedicated online education platform. So if you take a look at these slides, you may understand the 17 city and the local governments' efforts for implementation of SDG 4, 4.1, 4.3, 4.4, 5, 6, and 7. So there are various efforts made for implementation of all these sub-targets of SDG 4. Due to a time constraint, I cannot introduce each and every case to you, but I would like to introduce a few meaningful cases and share them with you. So among the SDG implementation cases created by the local government level, I'd like to share a few with you. The first one is case related to goal 4.1 executed by Seoul Metropolitan Office of Education. So this is related to the SDG 4.1, and the purpose is to support the basic academic abilities of all students to restore educational deficits caused by COVID-19. And this showcase of SDG 4 implementation shows how the Seoul Metropolitan Office of Education responded to the COVID-19 situation by providing tailored and high-quality education services to children. So if you take a look at the details, there was in-class support provided, as well as the support outside of school. So they are very meaningful examples. Within classes, the support or the educational services was made centering around the teachers providing basic academic skill development. So within school or in individual school level, the efforts were made to leave no one behind, and outside of school there are also supporting systems in place. The academic clinic center was provided to help children who have difficulties in learning. So there is a huge implication of the system with regard to how the basic academic skills have been reinforced in the midst of COVID-19 crisis. And the second case that I want to share with you is 전남온.com case pursued by 전남학교 Office of Education. And the purpose of this initiative or the program was to establish a high-quality distance education platform and to guarantee students' right to study of the COVID-19 pandemic situation. So real-time, the interactive feedback was possible in this platform, and actually self-directed learning environment is provided through the platform. So the mobile and the PC access are both allowed, and for each subject or for each class, students can take the lessons and achieve the expected standard of academic skills. The 전남온.com is developed by the South Jeolla Province Office of Education, and it is distributed and disseminated to the Office of Education, different offices of education nationwide. The next case is related to SDG 4.4, and it is created by
이 4차 산업혁명이 되면서 굉장히 새로운 기술에
Office of
적응을 하고 살아가야
Education,
하고
and
또
the
평생 배워야
purpose
하는
of this
그런
program is to
부분인데
foster the
이 학교
future
교육
talent.
단계에서는 미래 인재를
Actually
육성하는
foster the
부분에
future
집중을
talent
해서
with
AI
awareness
중심의
of
미래
information
교육을 위한
ethics and
선전
values
포고라고
as
하는
democratic
프로그램을
citizen
운영을
through the
했습니다.
fourth industrial
초중등
revolution in
학생들이
education.
어떤 미래
So the
사회에서
reinforcement of
요구하는
customized
핵심
AI
가치를
education
실현하고
capabilities
공감대를
and the training of
형성하기 위한
AISW
프로그램이라고 할 수 있고요.
teacher
중요한
experts
세부
and
내용을
operational
보시면
creative converged
맞춤형
index
AI
programs
교육 역량을
were
강화하고 또
provided.
AI와
So
소프트웨어
tailored
교육을
AI
위한
education is a key
교원들
content of
대상으로
this
한 전문가
program
양성
and
프로그램을
the formation of
운영했습니다.
a consensus
그리고
for
학생들과
the
함께
realization of
창의
future core
융합형
values
심화
of
프로그램을
elementary and middle school
운영하면서
students.
앞으로
Also,
새로운
the
사회에 대응할
converse
수 있는
form
역량을
of
키운 그러한
creative index
사례라고
programs
볼
are
수가
provided,
있겠습니다.
so the students can be equipped with the capabilities
네
required for
번째
them to live
사례는
in the fourth
네
industrial
번째와
revolution
다섯
era.
번째 사례는
And the
특별히
fourth and the
취약계층
fifth
학생들을
examples
중심으로 한 교육
are
불평등,
targeting
교육 격차를
the
완화하기 위한
vulnerable children
지도교육청의
to reduce
사례라고
the
볼 수가
learning gap
있겠습니다.
between
그래서
the
첫 번째
vulnerable
사례는
children and those
제주도
who are in autism.
교육청에서 수행한
So the first case is
복합적
pursued by
위기학생
Jeju Provincial Office of
지원이라고 하는
Education,
혼디 건염팀을
and the
운영한
program is
사례입니다.
called Hundi Konyam
모두 아시는 바와
to
같이
provide
우리
personalized
취약계층 학생들은
support to
학습에서뿐만이
students with
아니라
multiple
다양한 분야에서
crisis factors.
복합적인 어떤 문제들을 가지고 있습니다.
We all
이러한
know that there
복합적 위기
are a
요인을
group of students who suffer
극복하고
from
또 코로나
multiple
시기에
the
이런 학생들이
crises,
많아지면서
and we need to provide
개별
a
맞춤형 지원이
support
무엇보다도
which is
필요해졌습니다.
tailored to
그래서
meet the
정책
needs of each different
방향으로는
student.
학생들의 학습권을
And the policy
보장하고
direction
또
of this
학생
program is
개인별
to guarantee the
어떤 종합
right to
대책을
learning
마련한
of
것이
students
굉장히
and
큰
to prepare
특징이라고 할 수
comprehensive
있습니다.
measures for each
그래서
individual students.
제주도교육청에서는
Such as the
1차와
Provincial
2차,
Office of
3차에
Education
걸쳐서 이 안전망을 구축하는 데 포커스를 두었고요.
has made efforts to
1차
reinforce the
안전망은
third
학교
safety
안에서
net. The
혼디
first safety net
건염팀이라고 하는
is
전담
within
팀을 두어서
school
취약계층
safety
학생들을
net
지원을
called
했고요.
Hundi Konyam to
2차
provide the
안전망은
support the vulnerable
교육지원청,
students. And the second
지역사회 안에 있는
safety net
지원청
is created
단위에서
within and the
위센터와
community level.
건염팀 지원을 통해서
And
학생들을
also
지원한
the Hundi
모습입니다.
Konyam
그리고 3차
team
안전망
provided relevant
단계에서는
support for this second
시도
step or the
교육청
second
안에
level
있는
of
학교
safety net. And the
교육과
third
민주 시민 교육과
safety
또 학생 건강
net
증진
is
추진단,
related
위기
to
관리팀
the
이러한
crisis
팀들이 다
management
함께
team and the
움직이면서
health team
취약계층
within and the
학생들을 위한
specific
지원 체계를 만들었다는 특징이
administrative
있고요. 또 국제
district.
협력과와
And the
안전복지과 같은
international
또
cooperation
외부적인 다양한
and
일들을 하는
department
것들을
and the
통합해서
safety and the welfare
학생들 지원하는
department
체계를
within the
만들었고
administrative
지역사회와도
body
또 유기적인
also
협력 관계를
participated
가졌다는 것이
in this
큰
organic
특징이라고 할 수
the
있습니다.
cooperation program within
이러한
this
체계는
specific
학생 맞춤형
local
교육복지
city.
통합 지원을 내실화하고 또 기초학력과 난독증,
and also
정서위기,
another
학교
case
부적응,
is
다문화,
a
탈북,
program to
그리고
provide support
이러한
for
다양한
dyslexic and
취약계층 학생들이
illiterate
가지는 배경적인
students. So
영향을
there is
극복해
increasing
주기
need
위한
to
노력이라고
strengthen
볼 수가
early guidance
있겠습니다.
to solve the accumulated learning difficulties in the lower grades.
두 번째 서울시
of
교육청의 사례입니다.
those who
이
suffer
사례도
from
마찬가지로
dyslexic and
복합적인 어떤
illiterate
문제를 가진 취약계층 학생을 지원하기 위한
the cases.
시형 통합 교육복지
And the next
지원이라는
case that I want to
프로그램입니다.
share with you
이
is the case
프로그램의
of Seoul Metropolitan
목적은 아동
Office
청소년의
of
행복한
Education.
삶과 꿈을
And the
촘촘하게
program is
지원하는
created
실질적인
to
교육
realize
협치를
the
목적으로
practical
수행이
educational
되었고요.
cooperation to
교육
support
격차를
the quality
해소하고
life and the dreams
불평등을
of
완화하고
children and
또
youth while
선제적으로 종합
addressing
방역을
inequality in
강화하고
education
또 지역사회,
and
시민들과
strengthening
함께하는
the
교육
local
협력 체계를
quarantine
구축했다는
measures.
특징이 있습니다. 이 옆에 그림에서
And also
보시면
the community's cooperation was
통합복지
essential
정책의
to the operation
대상으로는
of this program, and the
교육
target
바우처
of
사업, 통합
this
사례관리
program
사업, 다양한
includes
학습 지원,
voucher and the
동단위의
various
협력
academy
체계,
support
학교와
and the
가정을
cooperative
연계하고 또
relations
긴급 위기
or
아동을
the
지원하는
mechanism
이러한
at dome or
전반적인
small at the
대상들을
town level.
빈틈없는 교육
So there
안전망을
is a
구축해서
thorough safety net
교육복지,
in the education
학습복지,
sector,
또
which
청소년
includes
복지, 주민복지 등으로 구분해서
education
통합한 그런
welfare,
사례라고 할 수
learning
있고요.
welfare,
특별히
and
서울
health
특별시
welfare.
그 교육청에서는
The Seoul
통합복지
Metropolitan
기관간의
Office of
협력을 상당히
Education
많이 강화를 했습니다.
emphasized and
그래서
reinforced
서울시청
the
그리고
cooperation, the organic
서울시교육청,
cooperation
자치구,
among
대학과
education-related
기업, 마을과
institutions,
돌봄기관,
including the
병원,
universities
경찰 등
and
여러
education
기관들이
offices
연합해서
and
또 연계
and the care
협력해서
centers within
이런
local
취약계층
community
학생들을 지원하는 일들을
to
많이 수행을
provide
했습니다.
the support
앞에서
to
보여드렸던
students
제주도
who are
교육청과
vulnerable
이
or the
서울시
marginalized.
교육청의 취약계층
So the
학생 지원
cases of the Jeju
사례는
Provincial Office
최근에
of Education and the Seoul
이런
Metropolitan
취약계층
Office of
학생들을 위해서
Education
단편적인
for the
지원이
support
아니라
of
좀
those who
통합적이고
are vulnerable
복합적인 지원으로
show
많이 정책
how
방향이 움직이고
the
있다는
Korean policy
모습들을
direction
확인할
has
수 있는 그러한
changed
사례라고 볼 수가 있습니다.
toward the organic and integrated support for
여섯 번째
the
사례는
marginalized ones.
이
And the
문해력과
sixth
관련한
case
SDG
that I want to share
목표인데요.
with you is
많은
the
교육청에서 최근에
SDG for
한글
target
미해득
related
또
to
난독증
those who
이러한
suffer
치료를
from
위해서 많이
dyslexic,
프로그램을 개설하고
dyslexic
운영을 하고
and
있습니다.
illiterate
그 중에서 오늘은 충남 교육청이
the cases.
한글 미해득 또
I'd
난독증
like to
학생
share
지원을
with you
위한
the case
사례를
of
계속
Chungcheongnam-do
보여드리도록
or
하겠습니다.
the South
이
Chungcheong Office
충남
of
교육청은
Education.
저학년 학습 부진 누적을
The
해결하기 위해서
office just
이제
came up
조기
with
교육
the
강화
idea to
필요성을
increase
인식했고요. 특히 이제 충남 교육청
the academy a
국내 보령
guidance
지역이
for
있습니다.
those
그
who
보령 학력
have
성장
some learning
프로젝트를
difficulties, and
2020년부터
also
운영을
the
하면서
Boryong
초등학교,
Academy
중학교,
Growth Project
고등학교,
has been
특수학교에
operated since
48개
August
학교가 모두
2020, and a
참여해서
total of
난독증
48
학생 지원을
elementary,
위한
middle
사전검사와 신층검사,
school, and
한글
high
해득 책임
school
교육을 위한 장학 지원, 또 기초학력
participated
협력교사인
in this
두레맘 운영
program.
등이
And
다양한
the contents-related
지원을
activities
했고요.
include
그러한 성과로
the preliminary and
관내
in-depth
한글
examination
미해득 학생이 초등학교
to
4학년에서
support
6학년까지
dyslexic
모두 한
students and
명도 발견하지
implementation
않은
of a
그러한 우수
scholarship
사례라고 할 수
support
있겠습니다.
for responsible education for learning Korean. As a
그다음
result,
일곱 번째
the 100%
사례는
literacy
이
rate achieved among
SDG4와 또
4th
굉장히
to
밀접한
6th
관련이 있는
grade
그
students.
지속 가능
And the
발전
next case that I
그리고
want to
글로벌
share with you
시민교육과
is
관련한 사례들입니다.
related to the
크게
SDG
이제 한
4.7, which is global citizenship
첫
online. I'd like
번째는
to
경기도 교육청
share
안에
the
있는
three cases related to this
가산고등학교에서
global
이 글로벌
citizenship
온라인
online. And
세계
the first
시민
case
교육을 플랫폼을 구축해서
of this global
운영한
citizenship
사례라고
online is
볼 수
Dasan.
있습니다. 그래서 그 총 13개 SDG가 가지고 있는 목적과
of the Gyeonggi
국제교류 수업을
province.
위해서 다산고등학교는 온라인
So Dasan
플랫폼을
High
구축을
School
했고
established the
이
online
온라인
platform
플랫폼
to deal
안에는
with 13
콘텐츠
and
플랫폼,
SDG
온라인 클래스 플랫폼,
goals
또
and
글로벌
to
클래스
provide
플랫폼을
international
구축해서
exchange
세계
classes. So
다양한
the
학생들과
content
교류했다는
platform
특징을
and
가지고
online class
있습니다.
platform as well as
그래서 이
global
글로벌
class
클래스
platform
플랫폼의
were
사례가
offered
그림으로
and
제시가 되어
provided to
있는데요.
Dasan High School
그
students.
세계
As you
교육
can see
혁신
in this
전문가
diagram,
집단을 만들어서 구성을 했고
the global
또 글로벌
citizenship
수업을 위한
expert group
네트워크를
was created
구성했습니다.
and
그리고 글로벌
put
러닝
into operation, and the
커넥션을
global learning
구축했고 또 그
connection
수업을
was
통해서
created, and through
다양한
the global
학생들의 문화
class
공연, 교류가
or the global
이루어진
class
그러한
platform,
사례라고 볼
various
수
cultural
있습니다.
exchanges have been made among
다음은
the
이제
students.
전남교육청에서 실시한 온라인 국제
The
교육
next case
프로그램
is the
Hello
virtual international
in
exchange
Friends라고 하는
program
프로그램입니다.
called Hello in
코로나
Friends,
위기에서 우리가 만날 수 없는
developed
상황에서
by
이 온라인
South
안에서
Jeolla
다양한 학생들과
Office
또
of
다양한
Education.
국가의 학생들을 만나면서 세계
due
시민
to the
의식을
COVID-19
함양한
pandemic, the
그러한 사례라고
exchanges
볼 수 있습니다.
among the
그래서
students
총
living in
13개국
different areas
학생들과
have been dramatically
1대1로
reduced.
매칭을 해서
So
쌍방향 온라인
the operation of
프로젝트를
future-oriented international
실시했고요.
exchange
또
business
사무와
model
수용성 증대 등을 위해서
was
미래형
actually
국제교류
launched,
사업도
such as
모형을
one-on-one
운영했습니다.
matching with the students from
중요한
13
수업 안에서
countries
이루어진
and
내용을
interactive
보면
online project
그
classes.
상호 문화
So if you
소개,
take a look at the
그리고
contents
프로젝트
of the
활동,
class,
또 오프라인
the introduction,
교류를
mutual
실시하는
the
모습들을
culture and the
밑에 있는
project
그림에서 확인을
activities
하실 수가 있습니다.
to create a better and sustainable world, and offline
그다음으로는
exchanges
부산시 교육청에서 수행한 교사 연수입니다.
were provided
아무래도
to the
이
students. And the
SDG4
next
이행을
case
위해서
is
학교
related
안에서 다양한
to
프로그램을
the global
운영하기
citizenship
위해서는
education
이
teacher
교사들의 역량
training
그리고 인식이
pursued by
굉장히
Busan
중요합니다.
Metropolitan City
그래서
Office
부산시
of Education. We all
교육청에서는
know that
세계
for
시민교육
effective
선도교사
global
지도
citizenship
역량
education,
강화를 위해서
teachers'
이
capabilities
15차지
are
연수를
essential.
개발했고요.
So
세계 시민교육
the
교육 과정을
teachers' training
개발하고
program was
현장 적용
created
연구를
and
실시하면서
operated, and
많은
also the
교사들의
field
참여를
experience and the
유도했습니다.
blended
선도
strategy
교사들이 주도해서
was
이
pursued.
프로그램을 만들었고 운영했다는 특징이 있고요. 환경, 과학,
And actually, this
문화,
program was
이런 포스트
created
코로나
and
시대의
led
핵심
by
주제를
the
중심으로
teachers who have
심화
advanced
연구를 수행했고
capabilities in
또
the
교육
sector of global
주제와 상황에
citizenship
적합한
education, and the
실시간
various
원격
on
연구,
and offline
현장 체험,
the
블렌디드
activities
등을
have
통해서
been provided to
다양한
the students, such
온오프라인
as
교육을
real-time remote
방법을
training,
활용했다는 것이
field
큰 특징이라고 할
experiences,
수
and the
있습니다.
blended case studies.
마지막 정리를 조금 해보도록 하겠습니다. 지금까지 총
Last,
9개 국내
I would like
사례를
to
소개를
summarize
시켜드렸는데 이 코로나
my
위기가 던진
presentation.
한국
I
교육의
have
큰
introduced
과제들이
nine
있었고
the domestic
SDG4
cases
이행을
with regard to
하면서
the
더
implementation
많은
of
앞으로 과제들을
SDG4.
발굴할 수가 있었습니다.
We've identified the issues
무엇보다도
that we need to
중요한
address
성과라면
over the course
코로나
of
위기 속에서도
SDG4
방역이
implementation,
더 강화가
and the
되었고
programs were developed to
SDG4
address
구현을
those
위한
issues. And
노력들이
over the
시도
course, I
교육청마다
believe
모두 수행이
that
되었다는 것입니다.
the local
그리고 온라인 수업 확대에 따라서 플랫폼을 구축하고
the education
기기를
offices
보급하고
will further
콘텐츠를 개발하는
increase their
활동들도 수행을
efforts
했습니다.
to
특별히 기초학력,
provide the
난독증, 취약계층 학생들을
SDG4
좀 더
implementation related
집중적으로
tasks,
지원하기 위한
particularly
노력들이
providing special
많이
care for
이루어졌다는 것이 또 하나의
the
성과라고 할
vulnerable
수
ones
있고
and the
국제교류와
students
세계
who are
시민교육까지
dyslexic or
이
illiterate. And
플랫폼이
also the
확장되었다는
global
것이
citizenship
중요한
education was
성과였습니다.
included as a part of the
앞으로
online
이 코로나
education platform.
위기가 우리 한국 교육에 던진
The
과제라고
COVID-19
한다면 이
pandemic
온라인
has
안에서
brought
이루어진 것뿐
about
아니라
new
이
challenges
오프라인에서도
to the
학생
Korean
맞춤형으로
educational
성장을
sector. Not only in
지원하는 다양한 지원
offline
체제가
and
더 많이
education sector, but
구축되어야
also in
한다는
online
것입니다.
and platform,
그리고
the
교사들의
customized and
역량이
personalized
무엇보다도
education programs
강화되어야
should be
하고요.
provided.
또
In order
앞에서
to
보셨듯이
achieve that,
학교뿐만이 아니라
teachers' capabilities
지역사회와
should be
협력하는 일들이
reinforced and
상당히
strengthened.
많아지고
And also,
있습니다.
there are many
학교를 포함한
cases which
교사,
require
또
the
지역사회,
collaboration
또
and the
전
cooperation
국가
with
글로벌
the local communities.
차원에서
So
이러한
not
민관
only at the
협력
local
방식이
level,
다변화되고 또
but also at
더
the national and the
확장되어
global
나갈 그런
level, this
과제들을
kind of
가지고
private
있습니다.
and the
이제
public sector
아무래도 이
collaboration should be
SDG4를
further
학교 안에서
reinforced.
실현하기 위해서는
In order to
학교
implement the
교육
SDG
과정과
within
연계해야 하는
and the
그러한
school
과제도 남아
boundary, the
있습니다.
school curriculum should
학교
be
교육
connected
과정
with
수업
the
속에서
SDG4
교사가 어떻게 이 이행 과제들을
goals.
목표들을 인식하고
And teachers
수업에
should be
반영해서
aware
좋은
of
성과를
the
낼지
importance
고민이
of
필요하고요.
SDG4
또
goals
학교 교육의
and should
포용성이
reflect them
학교
on their curriculum.
청소년에게까지 더 확대되어야 할 과제도 있고요.
And
또
also
글로벌
the
플랫폼을
SDG4 related
활용해서
education
지속
that
가능한
is
또
being provided
글로벌 세계
inside of
시민교육
school should be also
양성을 위한
extended or
다양한
should be open
국가와의
to those
교류
who are outside of
연대를
school.
확대해
And
나가는
also
과제를
expansion of
한국 교육에
exchanges and
던져지고
solidarity
있습니다.
with various countries using
이
global platform is
다양한
required
항목에서
for
노력을
us to
말씀드린
do
거고요.
in the future.
발표를
Up until now, I
마치도록
have briefed
하겠습니다.
on the domestic
감사합니다.
cases of SDG4 implementation. This concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.
네, 김윤희 교수님 감사드립니다. 앞서
Thank you very
한명구
much,
사무총장님께서는 중앙정부
Professor
차원에서
Kim
우리
Min-hee,
SDG
Secretary General
이행에
Han
대해서
Kyung-gu, took a look at
말씀하셨다면
SDG4
김민희
implementation from the
교수님께서는
central government
시도교육청
perspective.
중심으로
I believe Professor
코로나19에 대응한
Kim
그런
took
주요
a look
사례에
at
대해서
educational
흥미롭게 전달해
responses to
주셔서
COVID-19
감사드립니다.
from the
역시
local and
시도교육청과
provincial
관련돼서
level. She is
전문적인 연구를
indeed
많이
an
하신
expert
교수님답게
researcher
좋은
in the
흥미로운
efforts of
우수
local
사례들을
and
많이 소개해 주셔서
provincial
감사드립니다.
efforts,
수고
and
많으셨습니다.
it was a very interesting
다음으로는
presentation. Next, I would
마노스
like to
안토니니스
invite
유네스코
Director of the
세계교육
Global Education
현황보고실
Monitoring
실장님께서
Report of
발표하시겠습니다.
UNESCO, Manos
안토니니스
Antoninis.
실장님은 SDG4
He
지표에 관한 전문가
is
협력그룹
a
공동 의장으로도 활동하고
co-chair of the
계시며
Technical Cooperation Group on SDG4 indicators, and he is a former senior consultant of the Oxford Policy Management. The title of this presentation is The Global Status of SDG4 Implementation and Suggestions for the Republic of Korea. He is joining us from Paris, where the UNESCO headquarters is. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good evening. It's a great pleasure and a great honor to take part in this event that is really extremely well organized and informative. And I'm going to take you through this rather complicated and multidimensional topic in as short a time as possible. If we can turn on to the next slide. It is a very important question how we actually evaluate SDG4, but let me tell you a couple of words about the Global Education Monitoring Report, for those of you who may not be so familiar in the Korean context with our work. We are an editorially independent report hosted by UNESCO since 2002. But in 2015, and I was very lucky and honored to be present in Incheon at the time, we received a global mandate from the international community to continue our work to monitor education in the SDGs. And our mandate is twin. First, we report on progress in education in the SDGs. That means we have a section in every publication that goes through each one of the 10 SDG 4 targets. Also, the relationship of education with other SDGs and education financing. Secondly, we have a mandate to monitor the implementation of national and international strategies to achieve SDG 4, as these were outlined in the Education 2030 Framework for Action. And that justifies why every report has a theme that is selected by our International Advisory Board. The purpose of this monitoring is to help hold all partners to account for their commitments to achieve SDG 4. And as you see from these images, since in this new era, post-2015, we have published already 4 reports, and tomorrow, in fact, we're launching the 5th report in the series, which focuses on one of the dimensions, in fact, that Dr. Han referred to earlier, education as a public good, the relationship between education, between state and non-state actors in education. So please do stay tuned. The presentation, the launch is actually taking place tomorrow, and from tomorrow there will be a series of events marking this topic, and we would be delighted to also have a presentation in Korea on it. Turning to the next slide, as I was mentioning earlier, it is a very difficult topic. How do we actually evaluate progress on SDG 4? Let's say, roughly speaking, there are 2 ways of doing that. The first is the quantitative monitoring, to which I will mention a few things in the next 3 slides. We have an SDG 4 monitoring framework. It is a very ambitious, very progressive, very forward-looking monitoring framework that has expanded the range of indicators that we are covering, expanded in terms of covering all levels of education, expanded also in terms of the equity dimension, and expanded, that's very important, in the great wealth and depth of the different sources that we're using. We're no longer using just one source, but we are combining very different sources, and that has really added extremely important insights. But there's also the qualitative element, and I think many of the presentations, the 2 presentations that preceded me really focused on that, and that is really extremely important. But SDG 4 is about the whole of education. So how do we actually organize our evaluative activities? In 2019, for the high-level political forum, the APEX or forum for the follow-up and review of SDG 4, we had prepared a publication called Beyond Commitments, which was quite similar in some ways to what Dr. Han was saying about the 4 core issues that came out of UNESCO's latest report on the futures of education. We feel that post-2015, education systems and education ministries need to look, first of all, beyond averages. Equity and inclusion have come to the center of our debates. That's something that was not really quite the case before. Secondly, it's about looking beyond the basics. And Korea has been championing the idea that education is not just about the fundamentals, it's also about content that is fit for sustainable development and global citizenship. It's also about looking beyond education, because the spirit of the SDGs is a cross-sectoral collaboration. It's about looking beyond access. Quality and learning outcomes have really entered the debate as they had not done so, at least at the global scale, before 2015. It is beyond schooling, and that's a message that was loud and clear in the previous presentations. We're talking about lifelong learning and the rights to it, which is a concept that is developing. And finally, it's beyond any single one country. SDG 4 will only be achieved if we exchange our lessons and our experiences through regional and global collaboration. The next slide, I'm going to actually briefly present some of the core indicators and the progress we have made, or where we actually currently stand, on the 7 indicators that I'm going to mention also later that form the core of our national benchmarking process. The out-of-school rate. We know that today 8% of primary school age, 15% of lower secondary school age, and 35% of upper secondary school age children, adolescents, and youth are out of school. The primary school out-of-school rate actually has remained stubbornly constant for quite a long time. The completion rate. So, okay, it's one thing to be in school, but reaching the end is a different matter. As of today, or at least as of the situation just before the pandemic struck, 85% of children were completing primary school, 72% of adolescents were completing lower secondary school, and just 51% of youth were completing upper secondary school. Of course, very few countries can achieve Korea's achievement of essentially ensuring that every single young person completes upper secondary education. The minimum learning proficiency, there has been a tremendous effort to try and form a better understanding of where we are in terms of this goal. The best estimate provided by the UNESCO Institute for Statistics tells us that 51% of students achieve minimum learning proficiency at the end of primary education. And our best estimate of annual progress is that this percentage grows by, let's say, about half a percentage point every year, which means it would take us a very long time, well beyond 2030, to even come anywhere near achieving this goal. The preschool rate, so the percentage of children who are in school 1 year before their official entry to primary education, is 73%, and it's growing quite rapidly at least 1% percentage point per year. That still means we will not achieve, but progress is quite rapid compared to the past. Coming to finance, only 1 in 3 countries are spending, apologies, I mean, as many as 1 in 3 countries are spending below both benchmarks that were agreed in 2015. That means less than 4% of the gross domestic product and less than 15% of their total public spending. That means they're unlikely to really achieve their goals because they spend well below the minimum that is required to achieve any sensible national education goals. On teacher, it is a complex indicator because national standards differ, but according to these national standards, still 1 in 5 primary school teachers are not appropriately trained for entering the classrooms. And finally, on equity, there is a slight gender disparity in secondary completion. Countries differ, with many countries having large disparity at the expense of girls, others at the expense of boys. But just to give you one statistic of the challenge that is facing the world, only 1 in 100 of the poorest rural girls complete secondary education in Africa, when in fact by 2030 we set the goal that all of them should achieve it. Going to the next a couple of slides, a few graphs just to show you how far parts of the world are even for achieving goals that were supposed to be achieved by 2015. This graph shows the completion rate between 2000 and 2020, just before the pandemic, as I mentioned. It shows 5 regions of the world. The blue line shows the percentage of children who complete primary education in time, which means not actually in time, but by the age 15. And you see that there has been growth, but still that countries are not exactly next to the 100% universal primary completion. The orange lines shows the young people who eventually complete because they start school late, they repeat several classes. And you see that even with this optimistic definition, still we have at least 1 in 4 children in Africa who do not complete primary education as of today, which means we still have a very long way to go even on a basic indicator as is primary completion. We will be featuring this new way of calculating the completion rate in a new site that will be launched tomorrow. It's called View, and it is actually accompanying the 3 websites that the report makes available on education inequalities, which is WIDE, on progress towards SDG 4, which is called SCOPE, and on country approaches to achieve selected policy areas through their laws and programs, which is called PEER. And to the next slide, this is very important when it comes to understanding how far we are from progress towards achieving universal minimum learning proficiency, the bars, the black bars, show the percentage of students who reach minimum proficiency. And you see, I was mentioning earlier that 51% of students of primary school age achieve this minimum proficiency. But that ignores those who actually do not make it to the end of primary school. And to take an extreme example, in the case of sub-Saharan Africa, 24% achieve minimum learning proficiency at the end of lower secondary education. But if you consider how many actually reach that level, only 1 in 10 adolescents reach the end of lower secondary education in time and have achieved minimum learning. That shows the magnitude of the challenge, at least for parts of the world. The next slide, I would like to emphasize, therefore, in that context, if we turn, yes, I was very pleased to see Dr. Han presenting really a very important development that was achieved this year. In 2015, all countries committed to achieve, to set intermediate benchmarks for 2020 and 2025, because we recognize that all countries are not starting from the same level. They start from very different levels, and each country has to make its own commitment, its own contribution to the global goal. That had not been done for the first 5 years, but we tried very hard, the UNESCO Institute for Statistics and the Global Education Monitoring Report, in the context of the Technical Cooperation Group on SDG 4 indicators, to agree, first of all, on a set of indicators that we could focus on, and these were the 7 indicators I presented earlier with their statistics, but then a process also, where we invite countries to explain how, in their plans, they're contributing to the achievement of the global goal. This has been an extremely valuable progress. We wanted to bring to education exactly what countries have done in the case of climate change, with their national determined contribution. And the good news, as you see from this graph, is that countries actually have contributed. About 40% of countries submitted by the 1st of October their national benchmarks. The Republic of Korea, one of them, and we're grateful for that. Another 10% committed to do that and have already been doing in the last month. So the percentage of countries that we have national benchmarks for has increased. So 1 in 2 countries are well on course to achieve that. Another 15% of countries are from 2 regional groups, the European Union and the Caribbean Community, where there are regional benchmarks. So essentially 2 in 3 countries have made such commitments, which is a great progress compared to where we were even just a few months ago. Then we have a few countries which have plans with targets but simply did not participate. So we're trying to engage these countries in submitting their targets. And finally, we have a few countries, 1 in 5 in total, that have plans without targets or have no national plans. We will be publishing a report with UNESCO Institute for Statistics in January, and we will be calling on all countries to be ready to submit their national contributions to SDG 4 in time for the UN Secretary General's Transforming Education Summit in September, so that all countries have their targets specified. To the last slide, and suggestions for the Republic of Korea. Well, it is very difficult to make suggestions for the Republic of Korea, not only, of course, because the Republic of Korea is one of the very few countries that have achieved some of the core objectives of this agenda already. But I would say 3 things. First of all, we heard already, and we would simply urge you to continue trying to lead the Incheon agenda. Of course, simply because it took place in the Republic of Korea, but also because the Republic of Korea is such a shining example of progress in education. So do continue to think of ways that you can influence the agenda and the commitment of countries in that process. A second and related suggestion is a perception that we have, at least from Paris, as we see it, and at least from my own personal experience, even before working for UNESCO, that the Korean international assistance program sometimes is not as coherent as it could be. Many other countries have organized their development agencies in ways that bring the different ministries' programs together, and we think there's still some scope for a more unified approach to some of the core development financing issues. But that's something, of course, that I know the administration has its own constraints, but it's something worth reflecting on how it could be improved. And third, and perhaps the issue that is closest to your heart, but also one that we are looking at with great concern. It is terrific to have Korea's support behind target 4.7. But we also need to recognize that the monitoring of that target is challenging. And we have currently a process whereby countries provide some self-reports in the process of monitoring these targets through the 1974 recommendation. But it's not clear whether that process is sufficiently formative for countries. We need, I believe, a more independent look at some of these very difficult and very sensitive topics of how countries cover core issues of sustainable development and global citizenship. And I think it would be interesting for Korea's contribution to this debate. Can we establish perhaps a slightly more independent perspective into how countries progress in this area? Because the current arrangement based on self-reporting is not taking us as far as perhaps we need in order to mobilize and facilitate better dialogue between countries. But that's an open question, and I would be very happy to follow in the future if you have similar concerns. That brings me to the end. Apologies if I took longer than I hoped. Thank you very much again for the invitation, and I'm happy to answer any questions at the end.
Thank you for your presentation. 네, 오늘 그 SDG4의 전 세계 이행 현황을
We are talking
발표하는
about the implementation of SDG4, and we were joined by the director of the Global Education Monitoring Report, and I think that his presentation highlighted the severity and the gravity of the situation we are faced now. Listening to his presentation, I was especially moved and by his call for Korea to play a greater role in pursuing the In-China Agenda and also the target 4.7. If you have any questions for Mr. Antoninis, please leave it in the chat box, and we will be able to address your questions during the discussions and Q&A.
Our next presenter is Professor Jari Lavonen of University of Helsinki. Professor Lavonen is also serving as the director of the National Teachers Education Forum in Finland. He couldn't make himself available for real-time participation for today's forum, so he sent his presentation in the form of video.
Good afternoon. I'm Professor Jari Lavonen from the University of Helsinki. My presentation is based on a book chapter I wrote with my colleagues to the book Primary and Secondary Education During COVID. In a nutshell, according to the National Surveys and Studies, we can conclude that teachers were quite successful in changing to the digital mode in spring 2020. Also, the pedagogy was appropriate, and teachers were supported by their colleagues and tutor teachers. Tutor teachers are teachers who are helping teachers in their classrooms to use digital tools in teaching and learning. On the other hand, there were in some schools challenges with the digital connections, and especially the well-being issue was important. Actually, the lack of well-being among principal teachers and students. So why this switch happened quite successful? There are three main reasons. So during the last 30 years in Finland, we have had very heavy strategic orientation to educational issues. And in the field of digital teaching and learning, we have had 6 national strategies. And resources have been allocated to the buying digital tools and organizing digital learning environments and supporting teachers in their professional learning. Also, many development projects have been organized in the context of those strategies. We have had follow-up studies related to the use of digital tools in teaching and learning, and the latest one recognized that half of the teachers have appropriate level of digital skills, and 40% have kind of advanced digi competencies. This means that they are able to support their colleagues in the use of tools. In high school level, all teachers are very good in using digital tools because our final examination is totally based on the use of digital tools. It's organized in digital environment. And also the teacher education have made progress in the use of digital tools. This is an example of the monitoring outcome, and you can see that between the years 17-18, in all fields of use of digital tools, there has been a progress. And for example, the use of digital learning environment was happening about in half of the lessons. Students' digital competencies are also high. There have been many national follow-up studies related to the students' use of digital tools, and also the international studies like Computers and Information Literacy Study 2018 recognized Finnish and South Korean students as the best in the use of digital tools. All schools in Finland have access to the internet, and quite reliable internet access is available. Students have email accounts. During the COVID time, the schools were able to borrow their laptops or other digital tools to students, and also there were quite good national support for schools, and the companies give old laptops to the schools, and our president was very active in encouraging companies to give old laptops to the schools. On the other hand, I mentioned this lack of well-being. So the principals could be divided to three groups. 40% feel engaged, almost 50 high stress, and 20 burnout during the COVID time. The principals who were engaged, they were able to support teachers well in the change to the distance teaching. And during the COVID time, teachers were divided to the four groups according to one national survey. There were 30% of the teachers were recognized as engaged in teaching and learning, and the burnout was recognized among 20% of the teachers. Earlier, this amount of burnout teachers was 10, so it was a huge increase of teachers who feel burnout. And there were many other outcomes in this national survey, like the better the teachers' digital skills, the more they like to be engaged, and the teachers in the risk of burnout were planning to leave the teaching profession. And this is very dangerous situation if there are many teachers who are planning to leave the position. This is one example of our microgroup study. We have been focusing to the project-based learning in middle school, high school level. And we were also making research that how the project-based learning was organized during the distance teaching time. The project-based learning is a good approach when we are willing to have more student collaboration, more engagement in science. And according to this study we organized together with US colleagues, we recognized that in randomly selected situations, about 5% of those situations were situations where students feel engagement in learning. And before the COVID time, that percent was 10%. So students are not engaged all the time, but there was a heavy drop in student feeling of engagement during the COVID time. However, we can make progress with teachers. So we organized the test during the springtime 2020 and autumn time 2020. The schools, not all schools, but some schools were in distance teaching mode. So we can see that it is possible to increase the students' planning of experiments, students' collaboration, students making conclusions based on the data. It's more challenging in distance teaching and learning situation than in traditional situation. There are many case studies in Finland done during the COVID time, and this is one example. So example of 2 fifth grade teachers who began to collaborate more and plan together online classes and organize distance teaching first and then collaboration activities and learning in a small group. So summarizing, so because we have had this long-term strategic orientation and also used resources for implementation of strategic aims, for supporting teachers to learn digital competencies, students to learn digital competencies, and also make progress with the digital infrastructure. So the switch in Finland happened quite smoothly, and the pedagogy was appropriate, and there was support available, especially this tutor teacher model, which was implemented about 5 years ago, was very, very important for teachers. They get support just in time, how to plan, how to make distance teaching and learning happen. But on the other hand, lack of well-being in all levels of education. Thank you for giving this opportunity to introduce the COVID time teaching and learning in Finland, and good luck for your conference.
Thank you for your presentation, Professor Lavonen. 지금 이제 라보넨 교수님께서는 핀란드와 한국 교육의 다른
Professor Lavonen
비슷한 부분을 비교해서
actually made a
굉장히
comparison
흥미롭게
between the
잘
digital
소개해
learning
주셨습니다.
of Korea and that
감사드립니다.
of Finland.
다음
Actually,
세션으로는
we
저희가
had an insight about the
발표를 다
similarities and the
마쳤고요.
differences of digital learning between
실시간
Korea and Finland.
참가자님들께서
This concludes
질의사항을
the presentation
보내주셨어요.
part of the
질의사항을
session A,
중심으로
and we've collected a few questions from the audience and the participants. So we'd like to direct the question to our participants.
주준호님이 한경구 사무총장님께
Juno
드린
has
질문입니다.
a question for Mr.
관련 기존
Han-kyung-gu.
SDG 대비 한국 사회에
Compared
맞게
to
보완된 대표적 지표가 어떤 것이 있는지,
KSDG, or with relation to KSDG, what are some of the key indicators that have been developed? Also, how is KSDG integrated or aligned with the global SDG? Would you be able to answer this question?
제가 아는 범위 내에서
I
말씀드리자면
will respond to the question to the best of my knowledge.
이게 KSDG 경우에
In the case of KSDG, compared to the existing SDGs or the global SDGs, how is it integrated and aligned with the global SDGs was the question. The national goals have been set by taking into consideration the local context, and this is shared with the global community, and this is the underlying mechanism. Next year, at the high-level policy forum, we will be submitting a national report, and we will be outlining the implementation status in Korea. KSDG reports and relates the global SDGs to the policy priorities and policy areas in Korea. For instance, we have an indicator that we monitor on students who are receiving scholarships. We also have an indicator on the number of special needs teachers per classroom or per how many students. And some of these indicators are not in the global SDG indicators. And so we have employed this to enhance equality and the quality of education in Korea. Thank you very much. We are running out of time. I understand there may be follow-up questions to his response, but we will have to entertain those questions later on. The second question comes from Jari.
The question is directed to Professor Kim Min-hee, and this question is about the difficulties that the youth suffer from, particularly the poverty and the inequality in terms of the property and the real estate. So what could be the measures to enable the youth and the young Koreans to establish a kind of a stable footing in terms of their economic situation? Even though the question is not directly related to your question, since you are an expert in this area, you may answer this. You may be able to answer this question. So SDG is related to the sustainable the development and goals. So we actually need to provide support to the young people here in Korea so they can be better off. And actually, when we talk about youth, we can talk about actually we can divide the youth into the college students and those who graduate from the college. When it comes to college students, we have very active scholarship or the tuition loan program targeting the college students, and those who are in their high school students, we provide a specific quota system for the marginalized ones. And also there is a kind of social service related benefit system providing or the supporting the housing of young people. And that is a part of the government policy to support the self-reliance of young people. So when the young people get job or try to find the housing for themselves, or when they want to have some medical services, there are a certain level of the government support program. And actually, I believe that we need to identify more tasks in terms of supporting the self-reliance, economic self-reliance of young people. Thank you very much.
We have another question for Secretary General Han. I'm sure many were impressed with your presentation. That's why you are receiving so many questions. The next question comes from Jang Soo-hyun. You were talking about early childhood education. The question is related to equitable education in early childhood. You talked about how the government is providing subsidies for 3 to 5-year-olds. The question relates to the discrepancy in the quality of education that special needs toddlers receive compared to non-disabled students. She also mentioned that when special needs children attend public nurseries or kindergartens, they are exempt from subsidies that they can receive otherwise. So the question is, do you know about this situation and what are your thoughts? I would like to first ask for your understanding, and I would like to apologize first. I am not an expert in early childhood education, and I'm sure that there are separate government ministries in charge of what you have mentioned, and there will be different laws and regulations that govern those measures. But I can say what our goal is to provide quality education for children, whether they have a disability or not. And I want to highlight that UNESCO and the international community are on the same page when it comes to this ultimate goal. Of course, the reality right now is not perfect. I'm sure that is the case. However, the SDG highlights this principle that I've mentioned to you of providing quality and fair education for all children, whether they are disabled or not. And I think that if there are such issues right now, we need to be able to find a way to overcome those limitations. I ask you for your very poignant question. I'm not sure if that was a sufficient response. Just as the Secretary General mentioned, he is not an expert in this field, and the different government ministries are actually in charge of kindergartens and preschools. And I'm sure that the different local governments also have different laws and regulations. So I guess we need to get rid of the silos between the government ministries in order to overcome these challenges. I don't think we can entertain any more questions. Does anybody have any other questions? No. Do we have any questions for Mr. Antoninis? I would like to thank you for your patience, and I would like to thank you for your participation, Mr. Antoninis. I think your presentation was perfect, and it was perfectly clear to everyone, so you're not receiving any questions. I would like to thank you for your participation, and I would also like to thank you for staying with us. And we talked about SDG 4 implementations, and we, I think, had an opportunity to look back at the education reality in the COVID-19 era. I think we are going to have to wrap up session A. Thank you very much for your participation.